Very good morning, everyone. Welcome to another beautiful morning. A conversation with leaders in education. Today we have with us Carol Daniels, and Carol Daniels is the principal of Armidale Senior High School. And she's been there for, I would say, three or 4 years. Carol, would that be how long?
No, about 2.5, just over 2.5. Yeah, end of 2018.
2.5.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, almost 3.
But before we start, Carol, I'd just like to welcome everybody along. Good morning, David, Wendy, Tim, Taryn, and Margaret. Thanks very much for joining us. I know that it's fairly busy and you'll be off to your work afterwards. But we've got some great conversation to be had with Carol. She's had a fantastic journey through her education and actually started somewhere quite differently than our other two guests who were David and Stella. So Carol, you actually aren't born in WA or Australia, and you're actually from South Africa. Could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing in South Africa?
Yes, thank you and welcome everyone. Yes, I was born in Durban, South Africa, and left to come over to Australia almost 20 years ago now. So about 13 years of my education career spent as a teacher and a leader in South Africa before moving over with my family here to Australia. Spent my first teaching position at a school about 26 kilometres out of Durban at Marion Ridge Secondary School. Yeah, I was still fairly young, after your 4-year teaching, very new to education, but yeah, exciting to still work within my community and not have to sort of go away to another province, etc.
Yeah. And is it quite a different education system, Carol, between what you see in South Africa and in Australia, or are they fairly similar?
I would say they're fairly similar, and particularly in terms of curriculum focus, the vocational education focus, as well as the ATAR focus, as well as tertiary education. Of course, the difference is resourcing. However, the system is very, very much aligned in terms of the theoretical approaches, etc. Almost in line, for example, when we did outcomes-based, it was the same back there, etc. Yeah.
Okay. So for you to be able to come over and teach in WA, it was a fairly easy transition.
It was a fairly easy transition, and as I've said previously, Luke, I did spend a fair part of my 13 years in the vocational education and training sector, and when I arrived in Australia, I did do a stint of lecturing at TAFE, but then transitioned back to schools, and that was a very simple transition given that I hadn't really spent that long a period in secondary schools, senior high schools at that point. Yeah, it was a fairly easy transition.
Okay, good. Now, when you were a young teacher, where was your first school in WA that you taught at?
In Western Australia, it was my first appointment was at Leeming Senior High. In a public school. It was Leeming Senior High. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Now, as a young teacher, I always like to ask, can you remember the three learnings that you got in your first couple of years? Those real situations where you will never forget, that really nailed down teaching and what it's about.
Yes, and it's the students who teach us those, as always. And the three for me, as a new teacher, as I say, being usually as teachers are very much younger, we connect easily with the students. Right. But over my years, taking away working with younger secondary students, working with adults as well, the most important for me was always relationships. And those positive relationships we form with students, with adults, teachers, that they're the most important in terms of getting anything we need done around content, curriculum, those relationships of trust, our positivity. I found that really impactful and it resonated as in my early years and as time went on. And I guess always knowing not always, but you learn it very quickly in those first few years. Your why. Why is it that you're there as a teacher? And now, of course, your why as a leader. So those were important takeaways for me, that the relationships are extremely important. We've got lots of professional knowledge, lots of content that we want to impart, but we have to establish those positive relationships with all our stakeholders first.
And talking about relationships, because I feel exactly the same. The first part of teaching is to be able to relate with someone, regardless whether it's a student or a parent. But we need that bond. You use the word trust.
Yeah.
I'm interested do you think that is relationship building is something we're lacking or improving, or do we need a little bit more of that? Or do you think we're pretty good at our relationships in a general terms at schools?
I would say in the schools that I've worked in, my experience both in the South African or international context and in Australia, I'd say we're really good as human beings at forming that connection, and with our societies and things the way they are now, those relationships are becoming more meaningful in order to enact whatever it is we need to, system-wise, school-wise. So I'd say we're becoming better on the whole. In the schools I've worked in, as I say, it's all been about relationships first and foremost before we actually move on to anything else. And we're getting better, I'd say, as schools, teachers, leaders. Yes, we've seen the human side, the side that, we need to make the impact before we can input any further.
Yes. It is getting better and absolutely more necessary with face-to-face as we go online and more social media.
Yes.
It really is that deep connection between two people or between one person and a class.
Yes, it is. And also, as you mentioned, moving online and social media, those can so easily be seen as the way in which we connect. So at schools and whenever we have face-to-face, to really use those face-to-face relationships as a first and foremost and a basis for our connection is really becoming more important. And I think as teachers and educators and leaders, or educational leaders, we are becoming aware and almost just unconsciously becoming skilled at form the human connection. We need that human connection, as well as obviously the social media and online connections we have. So it's a balance at the moment, and I'd say the importance of human connection becoming more aware, unconscious, but need to become more aware.
Now, across your journey of many years, I dare say there's been some quite significant figures in your career. Could you share us some people that have actually been part of your journey that you look up to, are still with, or have actually influenced you as a leader and you as a teacher?
Yes, I'd say, and I'm going to mention both contexts because in South Africa, it was always first and foremost my teachers at my secondary school that I graduated from that today still hold a very important place because of the impact that they made. I remember them first and foremost, and then, of course, my learning and my education that came with them being teachers. Coming into Australia, I was very, very fortunate, and am fortunate, I should say, in having met a number of people who recognized the skill sets that I had immediately without me having to, do anything special. And they stay with me, and they're quite a few, and it's a bit, I don't really like to just single out people, but the people who are still very much part of my journey at the moment that I liaise with. And I will actually mention John Burke, and John is a principal as well. Yes. And is somebody who I relate to and worked alongside, learned from, and still, as I say, connect with. So somebody who's been really impactful and a mentor for me. There's others, Graham Butler, Ron Bamford, very important characters and individuals for me, Carolyn Cook. And from those leaders who obviously have many more years, I've learned different things. what's helped me shape my journey, take from some of them or take from some of their traits and characteristics and leave others. And I believe I'm all the better as a leader for having known, worked, and being with those people as part of my career journey. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's some great names there. Carolyn Cook, John Burke. There's Graham Butler. That would have been when you were down at Gilmore.
Yes. Graham Butler was Gilmore. Yes, Ron Bamford, Canning Vale College. And then, of course, there's been regional directors and also really important parts of being mentors for myself. Yeah.
Well, that's some great names there. There's some great names. Now, at Armidale Senior High School, you've been putting in place a positive culture. Is that what we would call your focus over the last few years?
Yes. As I said, it's about relationships. We begin everything with relationships, and along with that is the positivity that has to go with us as leaders. And Armidale Senior High, as you know, is a challenging school. We deal with complex situations on a daily basis, so not your ordinary teaching situations or non-teaching situations often. And that complexity can often be stressful. And to lead in that positive vein is really, really important. And as a leader, I found, in my situation at Armidale, I have to teach. So I lead and I teach. And my staff, my leadership team appreciate that. I'm there with them pretty much every step of the way and can fully understand where things are at. And I make decisions from that. My focus always been on the instructional core, the teachers, the students, and the content. And they've become very comfortable in working that way. And so we're on a very strong improvement journey, setting high expectations and standards, but working together, working collaboratively. Yeah.
Now, we were just sharing before we got into the meeting about your results from your national survey, which is, data is always good to see how we're traveling, what the status is, and whether all of that hard work has actually come to fruition. Could you just tell us a little bit about what your results look like and why you were so pleased?
Yes, I was extremely pleased. The last survey, National School Opinion Survey, which was done, was in 2018, prior to my coming into the school. Of course, we were due again to do one last year. And of course, given COVID, etc., finding the right time without inundating parents with extra information to fill in or gather from them, we got it done this year, at the beginning of this year. And the results were impactful. I was surprised in that, say in 2018, we had 44 parents responding, and I had 164 responses this time. And I guess what stood out, and I've really sat up, taken notice, and feel really pleased, is the alignment of that data, the responses from students, parents, teachers, pretty much in alignment in terms of course, quantitative, but just on those certain categories, all coming back the same. And that alignment, as we know as school leaders, and looking at where we're at just anecdotally, but seeing that data, it's just confirmed that we're going well, and our journey is validated by that data so far.
Yeah, well, look, that's great news, because it's pretty difficult to turn something around from what's always been, and considering the amount of time. But I know you did a lot of work in regards to empowering people to be part of that vision, and that's in itself is well done, is really well done. And I know that there's some great work being done out there with Stella Ginman, and the primary schools and the Southeast Corridor Network have really put a lot of effort into that K to 12 journey. Now, I know that you quite like the K to 12 journey, and you feel as if that's really part of the full education scope that you're in, not just secondary, but you like the full breadth of education. Now, you were the principal at York District High School. Is this where you saw your first real taste of what a K to 12 can look like?
Yes, it was. I've always been a strong advocate of pathways, and it just makes sense that that K to 12 continuum, that journey, and then post-secondary is what we should work towards as leaders. I mean, we're senior high, we're colleges, etc., and primary schools, but that connection and that collaboration is absolutely vital. And yes, York gave me the opportunity to really work towards impact in how that can look from the time a student enters kindergarten, academically, of course, until they transition out into the high school and then thereafter. Really impactful part of my journey as a school leader, as a principal, most rewarding to see that learning and the effort teachers put in during those early years that shape and move students right up until that year 6 transition. So yes, York was a very important part of that. And despite the wheat belt being as vast as it is, we worked very closely, primary schools, the district high schools, and of course the high school in that area that I was in, very closely to enact that K to 12 journey and secondary pathway for those students out. Yeah.
Did you, to be able to do that, was one of the things that you focused on was to, I suppose, amalgamate the senior staff and the primary staff. So that was more of a, so they weren't seen as a them and us, as in we're primary and we're secondary.
Yes.
You actually joined them together and allowed them to interact a bit more so they could understand the journey. And I dare say that's what you did do. And I'd be really interested, how did you do that? How did you get the senior school and the primary school to unite in a one vision?
Yeah, that was probably the most interesting part, that we were in one school, and it's so easy to sit as separate schools within the one school. And coming from, of course, a senior high background and looking at my staff, it wasn't difficult to work with the leadership team in backward mapping student data. And when you backward map that student data, it inevitably involves teachers having to share and to collaborate around those kids. Being on one campus makes it way easier. So that alignment occurred where we began to work as one team. Of course, we always do our phases of learning and they have their special foci. But as leader of York and working with my leadership team, I sought to backward map and then look at collaborating. Also been a very strong proponent of observations. We brought that in as well in the form of instructional rounds, which took teachers into each other's classrooms. So then that data sharing and working together slowly began to merge between the different phases of learning. Yeah.
So you actually were a bit ahead of your time just there, where you were saying that teachers actually went into other teachers' classrooms. It's like the walkthroughs that we do now. But am I to believe that we had like a secondary teacher going down into a primary school class and then looking at what a primary school teacher did?
Yes, absolutely. So, not having to be specialists at their content, but really looking at the way they delivered at that different phase. And then we'd have a focus area where we're going to either look at, is it just the student data, or is that focus on that part of the curriculum? But that began the conversations that are much needed between teachers who are on one campus, but perhaps not talking around those specific items. And then that's a seamless continuum of learning for students. Yes, it was very powerful. Is powerful?
It is.
Yes.
It is. It sort of comes back to that relationship conversation that we had before, that just building relationships with other teachers that are in the actual journey of a child. So
yes,
Carol, what about, in your journey, has there been any time where it's been, let's say, fairly tough, and there was, seems like the world was against you and the adversity? And then if there was, how did you get out of it? Because I know that that's one of the things that as teachers, it's quite stressful, and leaders, it's quite stressful. So what do you do to get yourself out of those situations where it's pretty difficult?
Yeah, well, as I've said initially, it's the formation of positive relationships as a start. But as you say, and we know in reality, that's not always going to appease or have everyone happy. And for me, it's about just, as I say, always focusing on really what's the outcome for the student, choosing my battle. So always aiming for a win-win rather than, I'm in charge, it's my score. It's really seeing the other side. And as I said at the start, I lead, but I teach. So always aiming to educate so that person has an understanding of why the decision is, etc. Adversity for me is very much, I'd say, I take it in my stride. I've come from a country where I grew up in a time of oppression. So I've always had to prove myself in terms of getting ahead. So it's never been difficult for me to overcome adversity without a lot of drama, if that's what we want to call it, or a lot of failure or win-lose situations. It's difficult, it's stressful, but I manage it along the lines of those positive relationships, that educative way of working with people, and that common goal of why we are there. So the ego comes out of it totally.
Oh, okay. I really like that part about it's about the child, it's about the outcome for the student, and it's also the win-win, and that you're not trying to take a position. That's it I suppose focuses our thoughts and our decision making into with clarity. Would that be correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it takes away what we often can sometimes refer to as the fluff, because with so much going on in people's lives, just in society, bringing things back to the basic of, what is our issue? Why are we in this situation? And what do we want? And as I say, always for me, it's the student, the teacher, the content, but obviously in adverse situations, most of the time, it's really around students and what's going to be best for them. And yeah, for me, it's clarity, ensuring that people understand. It's always that leader teacher perspective and not my personal coming into it. I written a master's that's really thesis really that's focused strongly on professional learning, but separating that personal from the professional. And that stays with me. And I doubt I ever personalize professional situations, and that's really been helpful in the face of adversity.
Very, very clear. Great answer. Really, really clear. I understand where you're coming from. Now, you do have a bit of a passion, I suppose, for taking on those schools that is it underprivileged? Would that be politically correct? What would you socioeconomic? What would be the correct way? Educate me in the in the vote on that one.
Yeah, low socioeconomic, is the term that's used to describe a school like Armidale Senior High. However, for me, it's a challenging school where we have some students who present with complex issues. And that doesn't mean every student in the school has complex issues. It means that a lot of our work can be spent with a few students, very few, or of very high need. They have high demands due to the complexity of their circumstance. And so that takes a different approach, a focused approach, much more work involved in ensuring that that student, along with every other, is going to succeed, and individualizing their learning and their pathway to ensure that they do succeed. So therein, I'd say, lies what we call a challenging school and a complex school.
Now, in summary of what you were just saying, I know that one of your missions, I suppose, or vision, is about presenting and allowing students to have more choices. And education is the basis of having more choices. And that's hence what I feel, that passion for bringing those low socioeconomic schools to allow students to have just a few more choices than they wouldn't normally get had they not had that really strong education focus. So choices. Would that be a fair comment, Carol?
That would be fair. Look, it's our role as leaders to ensure that we are not bogged down in circumstance, we're not bogged down in complexity of circumstance, but we use our knowledge and our experience to move students out of current circumstance. And that can only happen for me as a leader by choice. What we provide and put out there for our students, that education gives you the power to have choices later in your life, as opposed to just meeting current needs, appeasing, moving students on in that way. For me, that focus of education, of that academic, that higher standard will remain regardless of student circumstance. And it's my role along with my staff, my leadership team, to ensure that every student in that school has a choice when they finish. And you mentioned earlier working within the Southeast Corridor. We're fortunate. Armidale has got wonderful vocational education pathways, along with ATAR, of course, working with Cecil Andrews and Stella around STEM. And those pathways, and with all the wonderful primary schools we've got around us, whose strong focus on literacy and numeracy, teaching and learning, and myself working with at least one of them very strongly at this point, with a strong teaching and learning focus. So the key for me is not to focus on the circumstance students are in, because that's very surface for me. It's about going deeper as a leader and looking at that complexity and moving students out of that circumstance by education.
Yeah. Now we're just going to have just a couple of minutes, but before we finish up, is there anyone that's on the viewing at the moment that's tuned in? Have any questions for Carol that you've, as she's been talking about her journey, that you'd like to ask Carol that might be happening in your school, that you may feel as if she could shed some light onto that? So Taryn, Dilek, Margaret, Wendy, Georgina, Tim, is there anything that you'd like to put forward? More than happy for you to unmute and give us the question, or you can put it into the chat and we will answer it from there. I'll just give you a couple of seconds there. Anything you're thinking about? We all quiet. Looks like we've done a good job, Carol. So just finishing up there, I do have your motto out there at Armidale is inspire, motivate, and create. How does that work, and how does that sit with the students? Do you think they actually really take that on board?
Well, personally, my motto is to inspire, motivate, and create. The Armidale motto is aspire, strive, and achieve. And yes, on both, our students understand. It resonates with them what it means to aspire, what it means to strive to get there, and what it means to achieve, because again, by teaching, by actioning those words and having them be aware when they've actually achieved that, that's what the motto actually refers to, achieve. I've got this award. When they've done better and they progress, we have them understand that strive. So yes, it does sit well, and it resonates with them. Yes.
Fantastic. Look, Carol, that's right on 7:30, 7:31. I'd like to thank you very much for your time today. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. Really appreciate your journey, and this will be recorded, and I'll send the link, and so you can pass it on to other people, the other educators, etc. And have a fantastic day. Thank you very much, Carol. And thank you very much, Taryn, Dilek, Margaret, Wendy, Georgina, and Tim. And we will see you in another couple of weeks with another leader in education.
Thank you, Luke, and thanks everyone.